Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and I am here to discuss a shooter with you. So, I have talked a few times now that the shooter was brought up during this latest keynote. People kind of seeing it again, taking it as almost like a new thing. I knew that was going to happen, but then yesterday I saw on Reddit that there was this really great article that was put out by Rock Paper Shotgun entitled "CCP Won't Let Two Failed Shooters Get in the Way of Making the Perfect EVE Online FPS." And the thing about this is that this is the kind of title that lets me know that they don't actually know what they're talking about. And the reason why is because, depending on how you slice it, they have either had one they've had one first-person shooter and one effort that hasn't seen anything yet, or they've had three failed shooters. So there's a lot to go over. And but before we begin, I want to give some of my bona fides, all right? I love first-person shooters, at least some. Maybe not as much as some. I don't get every Call of Duty or whatever, but I used to play Halo all the time back in the day. I've been a big fan of first-person shooters, so when I found out that Dust 514 was being made, I was one of the people who got really, really excited about it. I bought a PlayStation 3 in order to play Dust 514. I was in the beta. My corporation, Aderon Robotics, the other dudes that went to FanFest, they fought and got first place in the first Dust tournament before Dust was even released. We were big into Dust, and at the time we were in faction warfare, and Dust was really big into faction warfare. And on top of all of that, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but eventually they would come out with the CPM, the Council of Planetary Management. And I already knew one of the people that got selected from his time as the CSM for faction warfare, to the point where when I went to PAX, I left my car at his house. So, we know each other. And so we've talked quite a bit, especially at the time about this all. I'd like to think that I have a relatively good perspective of what's happening. And as we go forward, I will definitely point out where I'm not sure as much because I stopped paying attention as much. But without further ado, let's just look a little bit at this article, and then we're going to look at what actually happened. So this says, hardly the first...
Caldari spying.
Hey, Riley07, thanks for that 5 months of subscriptions. 3 months of Caldari spying in a row. It's all one arc. All right. For well over half of EVE Online's existence, he has led an CCP in an effort to create the perfect spin-off shooter, stubbornly chasing the dream of a playable Starship Troopers. In London, we're doing an upcoming online tactical first-person shooter. The project is unannounced. We recognize that hard sci-fi in EVE universe is something that needs to exist, and we're committed to doing an innovative multiplayer atmospheric experience. And it says, any of those adjectives could have once applied to Dust 514, the competitive shooter CCP released exclusively for the PS3 almost a decade ago. A Battlefield-style FPS set across the outdoor environments reminiscent of Iceland. It is a genuine USP. It had genuine USP, live connectivity with EVE Online. Player ships in the MMO could pummel the playing field with orbital strikes, giving the mercs on their side an advantage. Fleets does the flying, Marines do the dying. The alluring symbiosis couldn't make up for the mediocre shooting, however, nor tempt EVE player corps away from their own schemes. By the time Dust shut down in 2016, orbital bombardments were only really something you saw on YouTube, a fascinating novelty rather than a game-changing mechanic. So I will probably talk about this more when we talk about Dust 514 in depth, but the problem is that this is just absolutely wrong, right? There was, by the time the end of, most of the structure of the game, when they finally put in structure, there were two different structured modes. There was the full-on Dust 514 mode, where you had war clones and you fought over territory, and that was explicitly in Molten Heath. And so, yes, there wasn't very much orbital bombardments there, because the mercenaries would have to have people in space in Molten Heath in order to do those bombardments, and the enemy would know to be able to send their own interception, so it was very dangerous, right? Meanwhile, in faction warfare, we got paid LP for shooting at things. So I didn't give a crap. I spent most of my time in Hades looking for districts, going to them, waiting long enough, and killing a bunch of console peasants. It was fun. I enjoyed it, and they paid us for it in LP. So no, there were plenty of orbital bombardments going on as long as it was attached to faction warfare. That being said, there were some pretty significant problems with its faction warfare implementation. That wasn't one of them. For its next attempt, CCP overcorrected, abandoning Dust's wonky ambition for far simpler design. Project Nova presented in playable form to the FanFest attendees in the years of Dust's demise, confined the action to the deck of a single spaceship. Chrome corridors connected control points which players scrapped over in sensible grounded firefights, evoking the considered pace and weighty consequence of Rainbow Six. You know what's funny? The phrasing of this is hilarious. And we're going to look at it when we get to Nova. But just remember, Chrome corridors connected control points which players scrapped over in sensible, grounded firefights, evoking the considered pace and weighty consequence of Rainbow Six. All right? It's going to be funny. It was perhaps a little too self-serious. I abhor silliness. And while CCP harbored plans to expand outward from that condensed demo, maybe it was a little appetite. There was little appetite for more among players. Trapped in the choke points of abstracted FPS map, we struggled to believe they were passengers on a Chimera-class carrier, let alone citizens of the wider EVE universe. Again, passengers is a bit of a push for word. Realizing his mistake, CCP scrapped Nova and opted for a third way. Having made FPS too hot, another too cold, now it seeks to make the middle one just right. Your reading the tea leaves is basically spot on. Dust was overambitious and broad, tried to achieve too many things, compromised on some of them. Nova was very focused, perhaps too focused. It didn't really seem like there were going to be a project that we wanted to carry further. We moved that idea of doing a shooter, which was extremely stubborn about wanting to make happen, and our London project is very much informed by all of those efforts. Maybe this one is somewhere in the middle. The move that he leads to, I can never pronounce his last name, alludes to is significant. Dust and Project Nova were both developed in CCP's studio in Shanghai. The new FPS will instead be handled by a new London office. We're going to see how Revelation, like this is the article that came out a week ago. This guy is a news dude for the internet or for gaming. So we're going to see whether or not this is actually, a new FPS that is a new London office, as if this was a discovery that we just found out. Spoiler alert. It was mainly a talent pool thing. Our Shanghai studio is much more excited about the mobile than they are about the PC. As such, the Shanghai team is now leading the efforts on the mobile 4X game, codename M5, on top of running Serenity, EVE Online's dedicated server in China. So yeah, this is actually cool to know. We didn't quite know what Shanghai studio was up to. We had some suspicion that it was the 4X game, and that was their major effort. But this, confirms that. Whatever, fine. It's really born from their desire to become. Okay, so the reason why I say whatever, fine, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about problems. The fact that Dust 514 was being produced in Shanghai, which caused not only cultural differences, but time differences, actually ended up causing a lot of problems for the development of 514, in my opinion. So the fact that they would move the shooter to the London office is a good thing in my eyes. And it says, it's competitive, but there's a lot of people in London to hire. It's also only a couple of hours from CCP's Icelandic homeland. It's a pretty big project internally. We're both recruiting into the project team-wise, and we've been starting more efforts in early community building under NDA. So it's time to open up the kimono a little bit. While the project isn't formally announced, there is no name associated with it, even a code name. It's just the London project. So we also want to explore why they're making this decision, right? This seems a bit maybe odd, Why are they talking about something that they haven't announced? And why are they staunchly refusing to talk about it? Does this mean that they are ashamed of it, or whatever? That's not necessarily the case, but we'll have to explore the whole history to understand why. On stage, Hilmar revealed that 63% of CCP employees today joined since the last FanFest in 2018, but the growth of the London studios comes in the wake of a painful contraction for CCP. Between 2012 and 2017, the developer invested heavily in VR. That dates a little bit back. Backing the technology in a wholehearted fashion, they created Eve Valkyrie, Heart and Mouth Dogfighting Simulator, and Spark, a Tron-like sport. They lament about the fact that Tron wasn't supported as much, and they actually explain that, basically both Eve Valkyrie and Spark's teams are just no longer part of the company in one way or another. So even if they want to support those products, it's going to be really, really hard for them to. So that's really unfortunate, but it is the way it is. Yeah. So in the meantime, it's back to Starship Troopers. There's a feeling within CCP and EVE Online's fiction is an unusual offering, even with the crowded world of video game sci-fi, and that the FPS genre could stand to benefit. It's not science fantasy. Head of PR George Kellyan says, it's not laser swords. New Eden's closest pop culture equivalent is The Expanse, or perhaps Infinite Warfare, the Call of Duty campaign in which Martian invaders are simply humans born off-world with a different worldview. One of the things I love about the fiction of New Eden is that all of the enemies in New Eden are humans. Even the ones that look like they may not be humans were at some point, or very close cousins to humans. And I like that science fiction where we're both our own saviors and our own downfall. We have it in us. Given that COD has long since turned its back on sci-fi, it does seem like there's a space for CCP to colonize with the London project. It's 21,000 years in the future, but the tone and texture of New Eden is very recognizable. Is recognizable. And it is something that I think people want to, certainly I want to, and the people on the team want to, see up close rather than a million miles away. We want to get there. And this is a big thing, which is that, overall, yes, I understand, with the whole PvE, PvP debate, EVE Online, the video game, is largely tooled towards directing people towards, the PvP experience, the big fights, that kind of stuff. But the problem is that to completely discount the PvE is to discount one of the most complex and interesting and intriguing universes in sci-fi. And so I've always been disappointed by the fact that our perspective of this sci-fi universe is only that of these very aloof, out of touch, immortal capsuleers. So the idea of having more games and being able to explore the New Eden universe without necessarily having the entire focus being on the capsuleers, I think it's just that's something I've always been really excited about. Either way, so we have some things on here that we agree with. We have some things in here that are questionable. Let's start at the beginning. In 2009, oh shoot, I said 2007 before. Oh well. In 2009, CCP officially announces Dust 514, an RTS MMO in the EVE universe. So this is when they first showed it off. It's a very early thing. I just wanted to kind of show off the fact that this is August 18th, 2009. Between then and the release of EVE of Dust 514, we have the Summer of Rage. So before we can totally understand what happened with Dust 514, we have to begin with the Summer of Rage. So basically, what I talked about this before, but just really briefly, EVE Online had released their Walking in Stations version, and as part of it, there was there was a new cash shop in which you would buy cosmetic outfits for your people. And while we had a back and forth about cosmetics versus actual things, there's a Golden Raven issue. I've talked about this in previous videos. One of the things that happened was shortly after the expansion was released and people were generally unhappy, an article was leaked known as from the Fearless newsletter. Okay. This is that newsletter. This is the one that was leaked. Okay. So in the heart of people being upset at $60 monocles and a new in-station environment that couldn't be turned off, and the fact that they literally were overheating video cards, and an internal email was leaked basically by CCP Hilmar saying effectively, watch what they do, not what they say. This gets leaked. It's more or less confirmed by Celine, an ex-member of CCP who's on the CSM. Surprised with the cover? Wait till you see the contents. What does CCP sell? CCP is selling people, experiences, and identity. In this, we are in competition with people's limited time for other experiences and identities. Consumerism can, up to a certain level, improve experiences and strengthen identity, making us more competitive. The idea here is that, like, there's this thing where things that you invest your money in, you actually value more, right? Like, you put some of yourself in something that you actually have invested in, and investing money is a very direct way to invest in something. But too much consumerism will ruin the experience. Think tourist traps. Okay. And then over here it says, so we're also selling people a social identity and persona. And then again, here we're in competition with many roles a person may have during the day. Some they might be happy to leave behind temporarily, like their work identity, but others they may be less interested in abandoning, like their role as parents or lovers. Now compare the two following people. I am an Eve space pirate that blows up innocent wayfarers for loot, and I am a golfer that likes to finish 18 holes on Sunday. Both of these will pay money to access their experience. Both will spend significant amounts of time doing so, and will have emotional moments in doing so. The later, though, will probably spend much more money indulging in his pastime. He will spend a lot of time researching and buying various different clubs, balls, and gloves and shoes. So what they're talking about is how once we really get into a hobby, once it goes from just being a game that we've tried out to the thing that we do, we actually want to invest and make sure that we have the best and get the t-shirts and get the all that stuff. All right. Our virtual, this right here, this is the article. We have no idea who leaked it. Are virtual goods sales in EVE a good thing? First of all, before we get to this one, I want to actually give the context. Why are we even bringing this up? Well, because this article, real quickly, is just talking about how they could sell cosmetics in Karna, this is what was happening. This was how they could have microtransactions built into the shooter from square one, right? So this is the big part of it, So Dust was shown as kind of like the example where it's like, this is how we can retrofit microtransactions into EVE. This is how we can start from scratch with Dust and make it that way from the beginning. And this is how we can do it with World of Darkness. Great. So, back to this article. This article is basically a debate, all right? There's what corp was my war clone in? Oh my god. I don't know. I don't remember. Either way, because I think I was just in Aderon. Yeah, you could be in a player corp, couldn't you? I think I might have just been in Aderon Robotics. Either way, I don't know. So the question is, are virtual goods sales in EVE a good thing? Then there's a yes article and a no article, right? And the yes article says, would virtual goods sales in EVE, in fact, or I would like virtual goods sales in EVE. In fact, I'd like to sell a lot more than vanity items. Does that mean I'm an evil capitalist that, unless stopped, will cause the entire company to catch fire and to be buried at sea by a secret team of Navy SEALs? Let's hope not. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that's a pretty strong opening. And then he goes, I don't really... we're going to face an uphill struggle, and the reason many of us never talk about this publicly is that we're burned at the stake by the players. I really don't understand the logic behind it, but that's probably been because I've been using virtual goods sales for a long time now, and actually prefer them over subscriptions. Why? Because let me manage my spending. Does that mean that they're universally good and we should slap a price tag on everything? Probably not. And like any other change we make to our game, they need to be well thought out and well executed. But most important of all, they need to provide value to our customers. I'll give you an example for something I think provides value for our customers, which I'd like to sell. Right now, you can store 50 personal fittings on our servers. That's more than enough for the average EVE player. Remember, they have actually increased it since this. For the average EVE player. But for our subset of our users, it's too small of a number. Why not be able to add more storage space for a small amount of money? So he is being extremely clear, right, about what he's asking for. And it's, the like gold ammo, like it's pay for advancement, pay for power, pay for extra things. You'd be able to upgrade multiple times if you needed and permanently add this benefit to your character, making it even more valuable. And you know what? If you don't like paying for this, you can always buy a Plex off the market and never have to get your credit card out, which is kind of the cop-out that they always that they go back to. It is technically true, but I mean, like it is valuable, but I don't know if that's necessarily the thing that you should absolutely lean on. But either way, I think that's pretty goddamn cool. Now, this shouldn't be a one-way street. Blah, blah, blah. We should give rewards to loyal subscribers. Okay. So, and hold on a second. Can I search this? Can I search this for a letter? Where is gold? Hello? I think the word gold shows up here, but now I'm trying to find it. Because this is the article that like the gold ammo came from, right? Hold on. This is not working out very well on a PDF. Oh well. Oops. All right, and then the other one says virtual goods sales can be positive in certain circumstances. However, when you introduce something that can create an imbalance where others can't compete with their spending power, you inevitably decrease their satisfaction with your product. As such, it is an essential that the game designed from the ground up to incorporate many virtual goods sales that fall outside of Plex, blah, 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 blah. So this guy is basically saying that virtual goods kind of cheapen the game and points to Lotro in his argument and all that stuff. So what happened here is that they wanted to have a debate. And so they had one person debate the pro and one person debate the con side of this argument, right? So just realize that the guy who wrote this top part was intentionally supposed to be giving as strong of an argument for this case as possible, right? So if it seems a little bit like extreme of a version of it, it's because he was intended to present that side of the argument. And then meanwhile, this one is more of the, I guess, conservative view on it. The problem here, though, is that this guy who at the top that wrote the article, he was the driving force in CCP's game design development or department. This is CCP Soundwave. This is the guy like in charge of things. Oh shoot, my stream marker got messed up. Meanwhile, John Tubefield is a great dude. I'm pretty sure he was like the guy, or he wasn't the guy who made tie-dye, but I can't remember what else he did. But like this dude kind of became a small folk hero for a while, but like he's pretty low level as far as like the scale of who's in charge goes. And so people saw it as the people in charge saying it's good and like a couple of the lower developers saying that it's bad and that this is going to be bad. So this is, when people talk about the Summer of Rage, this is it. This is why. So let's get back to Dust. In this environment, and after the burn of Dust, or sorry, the burn of this whole project, the death, like the failure of Carbon, the failure of Incarna, all this happens in 2011. All right. Next, Wait. Sorry. My bad. Earlier that month was this article, which was a dev blog about Dust 514. Hi, everybody. I'm a community manager for Dust 514, an upcoming title from CCP. This is the first time that you'll see Dust 514 highlighted in PlayStation blog, blah, blah, blah. So this is like them getting up, like gearing up to first starting out. This is their first presentation to the PlayStation community that they're doing this, right? Cool. Oh, sorry, my bad. This is the other reason why I pointed this out. So at this time, they say this. What if your successes and failures against your opposition impacted the course of events in a vast setting, potentially changed by a virtual world and gameplay experience of thousands of other players? More than that, what if its impact was felt across two separate games, one on the PS3 and one on the... Oh, no. Oh, shoot. This isn't when they said that. Boo. No, of course it's not, because it's on the PS3 blog. I thought I found the original announcement in which CCP said it was going to be a crossplay. Wait a minute. No, that's on... Is that on here? No. Darn it. Yeah, when they first came out with Dust 514, they were coming out with... They announced that it was going to be on all of the different consoles. But at this point... They announced it was locked in to PlayStation. Now, a lot of people like to talk about PlayStation and the deals that they got from Sony or whatever, and that's why they did it. And that probably was at least some of it. You know, they probably got money, and they did. There was a PS3 box set that came with Dust 514 in it, and my camera's super blown out. Wow, hold on. I guess that'll work. All right, so, you know, but the problem is that there was another reason that was given in the early days, which was actually that Microsoft didn't want to let them, all right? So Xbox Live, the issue is that Xbox Live expects you to utilize their architecture and sell your DLC for money because they want to be able to get their cut for that. So the fact that Dust 514 would run completely separate and on the Tranquility server, and they wanted to be able to update it, you know, do their free updates, Xbox said that they weren't allowed to. And there was a lot of calls for them to open up for that. And over time, you know, within a few months, that's when we got the announcement that it was going to be, you know, PS3 exclusive and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, nowadays it'd be different. Nowadays it's way different. But I'm just wanting to make sure people understand that, like, they wanted to do it, have it be cross-platform originally, between Xbox and PS3. So then we get this article on June 8th, which is, hold on. Yeah, this is 2 days later. So this article is basically the interview following up that initial announcement. So why can't I play it on... Torfi Franz says, EVE players have known about it for quite a while, but they weren't that surprised, although they didn't know it was a PS3 exclusive. Among our hardcore community, there was some rumblings, of course, why can't I play it on my PC? But you already have EVE on the PC. You already have EVE at home. What we're trying to do is introduce the world to EVE to a larger audience. We felt that being on console would open up the world to a much larger audience. Okay. So already we can see that it wasn't necessarily exactly what they preferred or had in mind when they first started Dust. And also, from the very, very beginning, there's this push to have it go to PC. All right? Talking about its scale, blah, blah, blah. It's development. That's fine. So this is the Dust 514 trailer.
All fire teams, this is command. Hostiles have taken the Skyfire battery. We have a team pinned down inside the control room. They will not hold without reinforcements. You're going to insert from the west and buy them some time. Fleetcom has informed there are rats approaching low orbit, so move fast. Here, go. Let's get snipers. Gunfire, take out those sentries. Copy that. Gunfighter 3-5 tallies your mark. RDV, hot drop. Skyfire is primed, cap at 100%. Fleetcom, enemy dread in low orbit. Copy, Dave arrays are tracking. Gunfighter 3-5, we are going down. Open discharge in 3, 2, 1.
They told us we had no chance. That we were fools to even try. But I'm a mercenary. I don't judge your ambitions. I only judge what you can afford. Pay my price, and I'll strike down the heavens. I've fought your war 1,000 times and won them all. And I know this is the moment that will change everything. On this day, the blood I spill will bring down an empire, and the world will burn before your very eyes. They will remember us, and they'll remember what happened here. On this battlefield, one shot can change the course of history. And you're going to be the one that takes it.
All right. So that was what we originally got for Dust 514 when they were first teasing it. This is October 10th, 2011. Oh, here we go. This is another explanation. So 8th of June, CCP says that Dust 514 would be tricky on Xbox Live. So this goes into this, this is their defense that they mounted. Most of Dust is running on our own technology. It's running on our own supercomputer. And Sony is a lot more open, shall we say, to allowing you to do these things. It may seem silly, but on Xbox Live, your identity is your Xbox Live identity. In the EVE universe, having people not know who you are is quite important. However, he denied the Xbox Live version of the shooter has always been out of the question. I don't think it's about saying we couldn't do it. I think some of the challenges we'd meet would be tricky. It's nice to work on one platform rather than two because it means that we don't have to make awkward compromises technically. So, okay, great. When you start to consider things like servers, billings, patchings, and even customer supports, it all becomes rather complicated. Blah, blah, blah. Got it. Oh, it can also as simple as the fact that Microsoft isn't ready for free-to-play as a business model, and they would want to control the item shops with any existing online publisher would refuse. So, there you go. 07, I'm doing good. When they first started Dust development, they were worried about cannibalizing the EVE player base. That's why there was a push for development on console. Yes. Yeah. But the idea was that it was going to be Xbox and PS3 originally. Or at least that was kind of what everybody expected. All right. So, I guess we're just going to skip straight to this. So then Dust 514 releases in... Hold on a second. I messed this up. Dust 514 launch. Yeah? Sure. So this was the beta launch, which it launched into beta, and the beta was pretty good.
You begin this life alone.
Notice
But
she's
there are
firing at
others
robots.
exactly like you. You make friends. You forge alliances. You adapt and strategize. And together, you make the battle your own.
Yep.
Your victories attract attention. People rally to your cause. And soon enough, you realize you don't have to join an army. You can make one.
You mean scope? Yeah, scope.
You can fight for wealth. You can fight for power. Whatever the cause, remember that just like you, your enemy doesn't fight alone.
So, a couple things to point out here. Like, this is obviously trying to show some of the fantasy of what they're working on, but you know, you choose your loadout and you drop in. But this is actually, they were intentionally trying to show off because we'd kind of seen, and I guess the alpha, apparently, we had seen the shooting, or like the player versus player mode of it. The entire point of this trailer was also to show off the PvE version of it. Is it a bit loud? It probably is a bit loud. This was to show off the fact that there was going to be like a co-op PvE that would also be added to it. This never happened. All right. Another thing that never happened. What? I'm not in a ship right now. Well, maybe I am, but either way. So where was I? Oh, another thing that was never realized. One of my biggest first indicators that there was going to be an issue was in Dust 514. They introduced the concept of Aurum, which is what Plex is now, basically. And the problem that I had was that they introduced Aurum in Eve in order to kind of create microtransactions to be able to be available, mini Plex, because one Plex was a month, right? So rather than having 500 Plex, it would be one Plex that you could break into Aurum and then spend for things like skins. Well, they introduced Aurum in Dust as well. However, they made it so that the Aurum in Dust was worth a different amount of money. Like, to buy the same amount of Aurum in Dust cost a different amount of cash than if you bought it for EVE Online. And that told me that not only were they not ready to unite the currencies like they said they were going to, but that there kind of was a shrinking expectation that that was what was going to happen ever, right? Like, why would you build two different currency translations for Aurum if you expect to ever have to fuse those two currencies into one? So what ended up happening was we had we tried to make agreements between Dust groups and Eve groups. I remember in particular this happened on the Minmatar Amar side of things, where like one of the more powerful, I think it was Amar guys, bought off 07, thank you for that. Bought off a bunch of the like big name mercs for in Dust, with the promise that as soon as currency is allowed to flow between, that this much would be paid to them. That never happened. I mean, like, the defense did, but their ability to transfer the ISK never happened. So the connections between Dust and 514, Dust and Eve were definitely there. I mean, like, you could do the orbital bombardments and stuff. And as I said earlier, in faction warfare, Dust 514 was a pivotal piece to it. But yeah, like, they clearly never even got close to the point, like the place where they promised or wanted to be. Yes, there are. So they added, you could see Dust mercenaries in the game. You could see Dust Mercenary items they added them all to the Eve. You could even see how many Dust Mercs were in the same system as you. Like it used to show both people, like pilots in space and dust guys in space. And if you went to the specific systems that were used for like the generic fights, you could see Dust Mercs, going there and doing their fights. And you could even have Dust Mercs in your corporation and like talk between them, I'm pretty sure. And that was kind of cool. But of course, Dust people didn't really have keyboards too much. But here's the thing. As much as a problem, or as much as we liked shooting at console peasants in faction warfare, the real problems with Dust 514 was deep and systemic, right? Personally, one of my biggest problems was that I was a dropship pilot, right? And they gave you the most, or they gave you basic setups that you could use for free, right? Like there was an assault guy, there was like a fast attack guy. There's like 4 different options for like your free suits. And one of those free loadouts included a rocket launcher with a mild homing on it. Now, it didn't do that much damage, but if you're flying these dropships were kind of like helicopters in their control. So they would cause an impact, which would cause the dropship to lurch to the side. And if in lurching to the side, you hit, say, a building, your dropship would probably die. Now, that doesn't like, you should just get good or whatever. The problem is that like the dropship pilots like myself wanted to be able to like swoop in and swoop out and drop people off and, do their part and like engage in the cities and going between buildings and winding between things. It was super exciting. But if you were at all effective, then very, very quickly, more and more of the enemy team would switch to these missile launchers to the point where like every time you come down, there's like 4 or 5 missiles coming at you at any given time. Knowing that it doesn't matter how many times you mow them down, it's free for them, and you are flying the single most expensive thing in the game. So, you can use free equipment to destroy the most expensive stuff. And the solution that most dropship pilots did was that they stayed up above where they couldn't get hit. And so like dropship pilots would just kind of orbit the skies, and like it just like so much coolness was factored out because of that. That was really just my personal thing. The real good example is actually faction warfare. So the way it worked was in faction warfare, when we complete complexes, we gain loyalty points, and it takes 1,000 loyalty points to flip a system. So that's what causes the percent to go up and down. Okay. What Dust 514 did was wins and losses in that system in Dust 514 on the faction warfare side. Wins for your team, like if the owner of the system's team won, then the LP or the VP that required to take the system went up, right? So in other words, the percentage would go down, but not because they lost victory points, but rather now the maximum number of victory points that they need has gone up. So now they've gotten a smaller percent of the total they need. Meanwhile, if the invading team wins, it lowers the amount of victory points. So the problem with this is, and combine that with the fact that when an iHub, when you go fully into vulnerable at 100%, then the iHub becomes vulnerable and you can bash it. Now you can plex it beyond that. You can get up to, I think, 115%, I think it is. But if at any time during that bash it is pulled out of vulnerable for even a second, the entire thing resets, right? So these two things combined made it so that the optimal strategy was actually to join the enemy team and throw it. Sorry, join your own team and throw it over and over again to force the other side to win a lot, which lowered the victory points requirement as low as it possibly could. Then, when they got it to vulnerable, if they began the process of bashing, you would immediately start joining in on their team, basically forfeit the match, which caused your team to lose, increasing the amount of victory points that they needed and pulling them out of vulnerable. So what it meant was that the strategy you ended up having to use, the optimal strategy, was to do exactly the opposite of what you would expect, right? Letting the other, forcing the other team to win was what you wanted until exactly when you needed to be able to pull it out from the fire. That, among the other things, like the dropship thing I was saying about, made it so that Dust 514 always had these kind of deep underlying systemic issues, as well as the missing PvE and all that sort of stuff. So, next. So then, in order to respond to this, CCP creates the Council of Planetary Management. The Council of Planetary Management is based off of the Council of Stellar Management. However, the first Council of Planetary Management, also known as CPM0, was chosen by CCP from the community. Nova Knife was one of the most prolific EVE Online players. EVE Dust 514 players. He was widely respected by people. But as you can see here, he is already talking about the issues that are happening, right? The reality that the community are most painfully aware of, that now most than ever, we stand at another turning point for 514, the release of 1.3 having just landed and the finishing touches being on 1.4. Everyone's anxiously awaiting evidence that the game will either start raising to the potential that we've seen all along, or continue to struggle with some of the same issues that have frustrated many of us since beta. 1.4 is the first normal release since CCP restructured their development process following Uprising's troubled launch. However, the most dangerous problems have not been fully recognized nor appreciated. The trust issues is not primarily reflected in communication frequency, although the two are directly related, blah, 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 blah. So, like, obviously, we are already kind of like, what is going on? So the community has been working very, very hard. And like I said, I've talked to Hans Jagerblitzen quite a bit during this time. And, he was very optimistic about what was going on. CCP kind of, at least, were talking to them. But yet, a lot of the steps that they were doing kept just not working out, right? Like they clearly didn't really know what they were doing, but there was an idea that they were reining it back in. And much in the same way as with FanFest this year, the expectation was that FanFest would bring the answers, right? That CCP said that they would have a huge announcement for Dust 514. And so a bunch of PS3 fans flew to Iceland to see firsthand what CCP was going to do to fix Dust 514. All right? Like, they're complaining about, like, all the pieces that are missing. All right. Before I get demonetized. So the Rouge Wedding. The Rouge Wedding is named that. Sorry about the formatting here. Old articles. The Rouge Wedding was named that because it was hosted by a guy named CCP Rouge. Okay? In this environment where everybody was turning to FanFest as being the answer to all of their prayers to Dust 514, what CCP did was come on stage and say, guys, we're porting it to the PC. Aren't you guys happy? So, no, they weren't. And thus was the beginning of, Rouge is red. That's correct. That's why we called it the Rouge Wedding. Correct. This was also, this was May 7th, 2014. So the red wedding was very much in people's minds at that time. So, this was kind of the breaking point. And at this point, Dust 514, as we kind of knew it, was more or less dead. Because why would anybody invest in it in the current iteration if you knew that its future was elsewhere? On top of that, the PlayStation was being sunsetted, so it really would be like an investment into nothing, right? So, but what they did was they showed off some really cool stuff. And hopefully it was trying to get people interested in it. And so the point of Project Legion was simply a port. In fact, when they first did it, they actually offered that all of our stuff, or at least our progress in Dust 514, would translate at least in some form over to Project Legion. Or, yeah. And they did actually end up showing another, or having another Council of Planetary Management. Again, by this point, it was more or less like there's this rabid fan base that is interested and excited about it. But the overall game, the thrust of the game itself was kind of already falling apart. And then, of course, on the 3rd of February, 2016, it was shut down. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Dust 514 was actually released on 514, right? And this wasn't necessarily like the meaning of 514. It was just, it was ready in the spring, and they thought it was pretty funny to have it, clever to have it come out at 514. But either way, Dust 514 shut down officially on the 30th of May, 2016. Was this a failure? I don't necessarily think so. CCP stands by the idea that this was actually profitable to them. They made money in the end off of it. And honestly, I still run into quite a few people today, some of the more dedicated people, that were attracted to EVE because of Dust 514. There really is like a lot of players, even though you don't think about this game as being broadly popular, there are an unusual amount of people, I would say, that will testify to the fact that they were here because of 514. So when we say that the shooter is something that continues to be something that's interesting, that's absolutely true. It may not necessarily be for you, but there are people that are in our community that have been in our community since 2016 and before, with the promise that the shooter would come back. Okay? Like, this is what they're here. This is what they're there for, So, but, we get Project Legion.
Hey guys, YellowClad here. Today I want to talk to you about a game called...
Oh no, this isn't what I meant. Yeah, so this is what they showed, right? So we could see kind of what they were doing with this. Trying to, make it cool, but, be like an up-to-date version of... Oh yeah, hold on. Actually, I want to show the video.
On my blue...
Oh, shh. I actually really like this. So that whole process was like during the matchmaking process, right? So it kind of hides it by literally searching for it on the map. And then there's the...
behind it, that it has
spawned...
Oh,
man. There you go. Clone transfer. Neural data received. Neural reconstruction in process. Neural reconstruction complete. Activating clone. So this is what we saw, right? So on the one hand, there were people that were really upset that it wasn't going to be Dust 514 anymore, or it wasn't going to be on the PS3 anymore. But, people were legitimately excited about this. This was cool. If they could do this, there were people like me that were like, oh, man, if they bring it to the PC, then they're no longer restricted by PS3 stuff. They can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And this was a good video that, really showcased that. And, they talked about the cool environments that they wanted to be able to do. So this is obviously a lava planet and whatnot. So... yeah, this was all about kind of the potential of what it would be if it came to the PC. I think that's about it for this. Is there? Oh, there's apparently... he's got a cloaking device, which they did add cloaking later in Dust, but that was one of the things that, they kind of struggled. Oh yeah, so he's like calling for fire, and there it goes. It fires. Cool. And then remember, this was like the most iconic piece of Dust 514, right? The fact that you could shoot from one to the other. And I guess before we actually leave Dust 514 completely, I feel like maybe we should watch the Operation Highlander video again, because this was really the high point of Dust 514 and really showcased the vision of it.
Caldari Prime, are you sure you're up for this? Attacking a sovereign Caldari planet in the middle of Galente space. My people can get the job done, but it's gonna be tight. We're gonna need some help getting through. We're tracking significant movement of Caldari forces towards the border zone. This could be our only chance to take back Caldari Prime. You handle the Titan. We'll take care of the rest. Overwatch, we are moving forward on District 5. Please stand by in orbit.
Prior to this, Tibus had taken back Caldari Prime and had put a Titan in orbit of it in order to defend it against the Galente.
Keep calm. Focus on your primaries. We'll make it through. I don't know where you got your intel from, but we're getting slaughtered down here. We need that strike. It's no picnic up here either. We're working on it. Somebody light up that HAV.
Does protect memories, though.
I'm through. Charlie, echo groups, keep them off me as long as you can. Coordinates locked in. Heads down. Here it comes.
So that, yeah, when you do that, you'd actually get kill mails for Dust soldiers.
That's how it's done. All clear. Moving on to the objective. Overwatch.
Half-Life 3
Planetary
confirmed.
defenses have been knocked down. The Leviathan is taking critical damage. Won't be long
Yes.
now.
No. Only small weapons could be used for orbital bombardment, so most of the time it's done by destroyers because they had the most guns. All right, so yeah, as was pointed out, the fight was way bigger than this. What they actually ended up doing was at the very beginning of the fight, Concord shows up and tells the Galente to stop, and the Galente guy is like, no, fuck off, and shoots at the Concord guy, and the Concord guy's like, all right, we're out. And the Concord just leaves, and everybody in the system gets a suspect flag, and it remained that way until the end of the event. So it became a free fire zone. Luminaire in the heart of Galente High-Sec was a free fire zone for that whole day, or for that whole event rather. Now there was still a lot of complaints in the end because it was a foregone conclusion. This is one of the reasons why it frustrates me that people say that the Triglavian invasion was a foregone conclusion, because this was a foregone conclusion, right? Like, it didn't matter necessarily if the Galente were winning on one side or the other. I mean, it was good when they did, but it was very clear that even when they didn't, they were still, even if the players that were supporting the Galente weren't winning, the Galente were going to win, right? The NPCs were going to destroy the Titan. And I mean, the fact that they even had the new map available, the servers went down and then this was the new map, or at least the change to the map that existed. So, it was very clearly a pre-scripted thing, but it was still cool. It was it was a showcase of the bond between players and, or the Dust game and the EVE Online game. All right, cool. So Ancient Gaming Noob is a really cool dude. You should check out his stuff. But yeah, the Project Nova, right? Eventually, hold on. Why did I have this? I don't know. All right. So then, next thing is April 22nd, 2016. Okay. So Rouge Wedding was 2014. So 2 years later, CCP announces that they are no longer going to be doing Project Legion. They are now going to do Project Nova. Is that a distinction without a difference? Absolutely not. And honestly, in a lot of ways, it's kind of snaky, right? Because the promise was that Project Legion was going to be a port of Dust. Therefore, there would be some mechanism, maybe not directly, but some mechanism to start out with some sort of extra progression or cool stuff based on your progression in Dust 514, right? That was a promise that they made when they first announced Project Legion. By changing it to Project Nova, those promises were null and void. They were no longer coming out with whatever Project Legion was, right? It's also worth noting that these are the names of internal projects. These were not necessarily the names of the games originally, right? These were the internal project names. CCP was giving us a peek behind the cover. And so they wanted to show us that they were going somewhere, so they showed us Project Nova or Legion, and then Project Legion got changed, and so they felt like they had to update us on that. And so then they informed us about Project Nova, and that's how we knew about Project Nova. It's now in Unreal Engine 4 instead of 3. It is set on ships, stations, and planets already familiar to the EVE player. Project Legion took a back seat to Dust 514 for a couple of years before CCP ramped it up again, promising that it would recycle the best parts of PlayStation 3 titles since Dust 514 goes offline next month. Have not shared an official trailer. Yeah, cool. And then, of course, here's the Rock, Paper, Shotgun article in the same manner. Their experience is being utilized to build a new game from scratch using Unreal Engine 4 while harnessing all of the learnings from Dust 514. So rather than trying to rebuild Dust 514, they're now building a new game that also happens to be a shooter set in 514. More or less, they are breaking away from the idea that it had to be connected to the living EVE universe. It could exist as its own thing. Yeah, CCP announced that they're shutting down Dust 514. Dust actually ties into EVE. Yeah. So then we have Project Nova's teaser trailer.
Wake up. You're not dead yet. You were immortal once. Brutal and merciless. A symbol of death and bloodshed. Now you lie broken. Betrayed. Forsaken. I offer redemption. The great darkness casts its shadow, gathering its forces, harvesting humanity. Be our deliverance. Rise.
Well, 2 years. Basically, every 2 years, things changed, more or less, or so. So this was Project Nova. A couple things I wanted to point out here, first of all. This person talking, we know her.
Now
Look,
you lie.
there's a Sorrow ship. That's Concord Sorrow.
A broken.
That's the same group that we're fighting right now in the event, by the way. They're killing clone soldiers. This person right here, this is Cassia Valkanir. All right? I think I just put out a video about her. I should have. Or the recording from when I talked about her in depth. But what's important here is that this teaser trailer, which is October 2018, this represents the fact that CCP expected to come out with Nova early to mid 2019. All right? That was their expectation. This was going to be the release of the open beta or open alpha, whatever it was. And then that was going to start by December. And we were going to look into releasing Project Nova in 2019. All right? And this is important for the other stuff that we've been talking about some of these other days, especially when it comes to the lore. It is not an accident that most of the plot that we are seeing about the Deathless stem back to 2018 specifically. Because in 2018, they began the arc that would eventually lead to the telling of, or that would lead to Nova, right? That there was this rising threat, that there was kidnapped, that ships were disappearing in the southern space lane, that smugglers were beginning to have a rise and new connections were being, within the CD underground were obviously forming. And from this, a new organization within Concord was arising, known as Aegis, led by this commander named Cassia Valkanir, who was assigned to take care of this problem, and she was developing her army of clone soldiers that she could use against them, known as Project Nova. Okay? That's what it was. So when they showed it and people hate it, they had to then rework the story. They had to pull back a little bit with where they were going and shift over. And some of it went to Triglavian stuff like Aegis and whatnot. And in fact, there's some explanation that those kidnapping might have been happening, early signs of the Triglavian invasion as well. And some of it has been left open as a hook for them to pick up now, which is kind of interesting. I'm not trying to be like conspiratorial about it, but I'm just letting you know, like, that's why they have this plot that they are able to pull into for this arc, is because there was things that were set up for Nova. So that's how Nova missiles were named? Yes. So just to give you guys an idea, this is the actual gameplay of Nova, right? So before we watch this, let's go ahead and remind ourselves what the article says, okay? So we're looking at where was the description? Yeah, here we go. All right, let's read the description that they give about Nova. Remember, this is from like this week, so he's familiar with this video, or at least he could be. It's just funny. Confine the action to the deck of a single spaceship. Chrome corridors connected control points, which players scrapped over insensible grounded firefights, invoking consider pace and weighty consequences of Rainbow Six. Okay, now this makes it sound like they are fighting on the inside of a spaceship, right, in the corridors and such. The reality is a bit different.
Charge point Charlie is under threat.
Oh, look. Did you see that? Did you see that, guys? Look, watch. So this guy is running over.
Charge point Charlie.
He kills this other dude, and immediately he starts flying away. Wait a minute. Why did he just start flying away? Is that a bug? Oh, look, that guy starts flying. Well, you can't really see it there, but and look, you're kind of outside. Like, you're in a corridor for sure, but like now you're not. Now you're outside. And that guy's also flying away. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here was that their plot was that this is Sancha's raiding party, right? And so we are now fighting on the surface of of the ship to take out the Sancha. And they thought it would be really cool if, like, when we killed somebody, then their anti-grav boots or their whatever mag boots or whatever it is that they justify to doing this fail and they just float away, right? But it lends itself to so many questions, like how are you jumping? What is going, like what
Is losing power.
so this is the real reason why people didn't like it. Like, I mean, the fighting was fine or whatever, but ultimately the entire setting was incredibly somewhere between confusing to uninspired, right? But the other piece to this is realize that in each case, CCP is like reacting to the problems of the previous one, right? So if you remember, one of the things that they never came out with in the original 514 was the PvE mode, right? That was the thing that they always promised and never delivered on, and a lot of people pointed to it as being like the thing that it was missing, right? And so here in Project Nova, we see that they put the PvE first, right? They put in, rather than saying, oh yeah, we're going to put in road drones eventually, they're like, all right, there's Sancha and we're fighting him, right? Like, yeah, this is it's about being a boarding party. Yep. And repelling another boarding party, basically. So, yeah, this is why people at FanFest, or Vegas, I think it was that year, was like, I ain't feeling it, right? This feels too, I want open, free areas. I want to be able to, like, scroll, skittle around planets. Like, I want more of that other stuff. So, ultimately, Project Nova was the beta, or the alpha, or whatever it was, the release was paused, and it was, quote, brought back to the drawing board, right? And by February of 2020, so again, now 2 years later, it's back to the drawing board. And 2 years later, they cancel Nova. They're just not, it's not going to work out, in favor of another online shooter. And it says, here's an interesting one. The developers behind EVE Online are shutting down production of Project Nova, the shooter spinoff. But they've announced that they're pressing ahead with a different shooter project that is also set in the EVE Online universe. EVE Online originally launched way back in 2003, blah, 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 blah. Following the Dust 514, CCP's next attempt to fuse FPS gameplay into EVE Online was called Project Nova. So already we've completely lost Legion, which is kind of interesting, right? And then they seemed to get quite far with it, to the point where pressers were given hands-on time with Project Nova in 2018. The game had some rough edges, as we reported at the time, but showed a fair bit of promise. Now we're hearing that CCP is winding down Project Nova and taking the responsibility for making a shooter spin-off away from the team in Reykjavik. So Dust 514 was originally Shanghai. Then they shift over to Reykjavik for Project Nova. Or, to Project Nova. And then at the end of Project Nova, they're shifting it away from the team in Reykjavik. We are continuing to develop our sci-fi multiplayer shooter concept, actively evolving it beyond the original scope of what we formerly codenamed Project Nova. Development efforts on this concept are now in the full focus of CCP London's studio. Project Nova team members based in Iceland have been moved on to other projects at our Reykjavik studio. So this is the end of Project Nova. Not because they completely stopped it and did a different thing, but rather the goals of what was the shooter that was internally Project Nova had changed sufficiently that they decided that they wanted to call it a new project title, right? This happens all the time in game development. In fact, I've argued this before, and I'll just say this right now. One of the biggest problems that CCP has in this case is not necessarily how many quote-unquote failed projects they've had, but rather how public they've been about it, right? Like, game companies shift and change a game multiple times. Diablo was originally a turn-based strategy game. And at some point, one of the guys asked the other one, well, what if we made it take 10 turns a second and auto pass when your turn is over? And thus the real-time action RPG was born, right? Like, that was a totally different game beforehand. Project Titan became, it was killed as an MMO, but its entire concept, its universe, and its assets were ported over and made Overwatch, right? So, as for the reason behind the move, the statement is this. This decision was taken because Project Nova's gameplay experience as presented in Vegas 2018 would not have achieved our ambitious goal for the concept. Moreover, it's very common for games in active development to evolve over time, often substantially. We remain committed to offering a rock-solid, action-oriented gameplay experience with stellar visuals, but due to significant changes in the scope and direction of our sci-fi multiplayer shooter game concept, it has also made sense to update how we refer to this project internally, so we are no longer using the codename Project Nova for this game concept. So it's not that the effort died, just the codename. We are moving away from but, and this is the big key, we are moving away from publicly announcing our internal project codenames and will wait until we are ready for a full reveal. We want to show you, rather than tell you, how we have evolved this concept, and we are looking forward to doing so when the time comes to present this concept as a fully fledged game. This is why we never got the new information. This is why we never got any sort of code names. This is why we don't know the development of the shooter, even though we know it's being developed this whole time. It's because they have learned they've been burned by how open they were, and therefore they have now opted to go the opposite, where they just are not telling us those details. This has led people to believe that they have somehow stopped developing because it's a change, but the only change is how much they're communicating it, okay? In fact, from the other article, it would seem that they're actually putting quite a bit of effort and have been for quite some time. What would happen to a person walking on the side of a Dominix when I use a micro drum drive? I assume that, like, everybody, they would be within your grav field. So they never told us Legion, never told us Nova. Then we would have just thought that they've been developing a replacement for Dust since Dust died. Right. Well, they didn't have to tell us about Legion, right? Like, I mean, yeah, I get it, but like, that's my point. Like, they could just be like, that we're working on a shooter. Yeah, it's not going to be quite like Dust anymore, you know. But by giving us those project names, then they feel like separate projects because they have separate names. All right. So 2020, they now have a new project. Nova is dead. Long live unannounced shooter. One of the things that we heard in the background was that it was being pulled back to add more MMO features. And this was around the same time that Destiny was big. So there's suspicions about that kind of thing. This was very corridor shooter. You know, so there's been predictions that the next one is going to be more, for lack of better word, open world. Open environment. Then there's this article from the same day, which is them, again, reinforcing that Project Nova is not canceled. It is simply being transformed into this new shooter. I'm glad that they said something about Project Nova, because it looked like, yeah, I mean, some of the people that have said it was good, like some of the people, a lot of the people I've talked to that played it, like thought it was fun to play, like technically, like it felt good as a shooter, but it was really wonky as a game, as you could see. All right, so this is the announcement. Ready? We're continuing to develop our sci-fi multiplayer shooter game concept. Although I wouldn't call this the announcement, but here's CCP Grendel on Reddit. Actively evolving it beyond the original scope for what we formerly codenamed Project Nova. Development efforts on this concept are now the full focus of the CCP London studio. Project Nova team members based in Iceland have been moved on to other projects. This decision was taken place because Project Nova's gameplay experience as presented at Vegas would not have achieved our... Yeah, this is the actual quote. Never mind. This is what we just read. So yes, then in October 2020, we get another article. Yes, CCP London is still working on an unannounced shooter. The HR department over at CCP London is looking pretty busy. Here we have one of our good friends tweeting about it. CCP London is the newest studio in CCP Games family, and we are currently developing our own team of lead developments and unannounced online shooter. And, he's already giving him crap. They're unannounced, renamed, shown, hidden, unannounced online shooter. Right? So, and we can actually go to the jobs board right now and not find it. Hold on. Core lead engineer at London. Experience with C++. Unreal Engine 4. Senior sound design, London. Unreal Engine 4. Associate development manager, London. I guess they don't really, the project manager doesn't need to have experience in Unreal, I suppose. But experience in managing software development, experience in working in agile environment. I don't know. This is actually maybe a more... Yeah, this is too technical of a, or this is like project manager stuff. So that's a different, but it's the same project. 3D environmental artist. Experience with working on Unreal 4. This is right now, by the way. And this is the way it's been since 2018. Like, they've been full court press hiring for this game pretty much for several years now. Here's an interesting one. Game designer. Unreal 4 experience and familiarity with the EVE universe, but also shipped at least one MMO, which is kind of odd, right? That goes into that whole, like, a shooter with MMO elements in it, right? And then senior gameplay engineer. Unreal. Wait, where's Blueprint? Yep, Unreal. In Reykjavik, we do have all these different jobs, and these are, just to kind of put into it, programming language agnostic. Outstanding Python skills, C++ knowledge. So this is what it looks like when they're hiring somebody for EVE Online client. And those other ones are what it looks like when they're hiring for the new shooter, right? So there you have it. And this is them commenting about it in 2020. So they've been basically doing that this whole time. Next. Spearsoft unites with CCP Games on a new title. This is actually one of the reasons why, the other reason why I believe that they're being so quiet about it, and why, like, even Hilmar is constrained in what he's allowed to talk about. Because as soon as you get another company this involved, like in a partnership, now you not only have commitments to yourself and your own group, but to them as well. And so that could actually be a constraint on what they are allowed to talk about until it's ready. But Spearsoft, a keyword studio specializing in code-developing, is proud to announce its partner with CCP Games, the creator of the largest living world of science fiction, EVE Online. It was found... blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's EVE Online stuff. About Spearsoft. Leading game development company headquartered in the heart of Silicon Valley, with development centers in US, Poland, and Russia. We offer full development capabilities and comprehensive professional teams that are built... This actually might be one of the reasons why in his discussion, like, the way his mind... or he thought about, like, Russia as a hiring pool rather than just as a customer base. During the last 16 years, Spearsoft has grown to over 600 developers. Blah, blah, blah. So, darn it, I can't... remember what they've all done. Oh, here we go. So these are some products that they've worked on. They've worked on Rainbow Siege, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Halo Infinite, Saints Row the Third, Call of Duty, FIFA. So one of the things that all of these kind of have in common, I believe, is those are all, or mostly, no, those are mostly EA, or at least somewhat, are these are EA games, or some of them at least, right? Either way. The reason why I bring that up is because the there has actually been several major hires in CCP. 07, thank you for that support for 3 months, Caldari Jones. Thank you. What we do. Oh, that's formula. No, sorry. Yeah, I mean, yes, technically I did, but the problem is that when I read through all of this before, FIFA was the one that they used in in an example that I read. So as I was just going through it, I saw the F and I just said what I knew in my head that they had said. So yeah, they port games, they do engineering, and they've worked with these different companies. Cool, right? Awesome. Oh yeah, I guess it is all Microsoft. So their job is to kind of help bring a game into production. And so now they're not only hiring a bunch of people, but they've been working with this other team since 2020. Look, it ain't their fault whether or not Stadia is good or not. It just means that they're, they do what the customers need them to do. And by the customer, I mean like the other development studios, right? I programmed some stuff on BlackBerry, not because I thought that BlackBerry was a great product, but because I was being paid to do it. Also, there's this article which came out that was in relationship to that. It was triggered by that other one. So this is talking about the Spirasoft. Spirasoft? Have I just been super dyslexic about this the whole time? I have been. Holy shit. Yeah, Spirasoft. Ain't it great? So yeah. Then in 2021, we get Alex Calvin. No, yes? No, that's by who? Adrian Blunt. So Adrian Blunt is now the guy in charge of CCP London, which is, of course, working on the new shooter. This is where I got FIFA from. Haha, see? And that's why I was hunting for EA. Because this guy is one of the people that they got from EA, right? There's a few people that they hired that were from EA originally. So this guy actually has some pretty big accolades under his belt when it comes to some production. And he gets hired to be the main person for the studio, for this studio. We have a history of breaking down barriers with our ambition. I've been making games for at least 20 years, and throughout my career, CCP has been pretty much a constant fixture. I've admired it from the start, yada, yada, yada. Felt like a dream job. It's quite a balanced team. Cool. Noisy Gamer, who's another great dude. Fans looking about CCP Games' latest project received a taste of last week to what to come with the new head of CCP's London studio, Adrian Blunt, gave him an interview. So this is his review of that interview that we just looked at, okay? So this was kind of the other half of that confirmation, or that information. So we knew that it was being moved to London, all that kind of stuff, and then we knew that they were hiring for it, and then Adrian Blunt kind of functioned as like the capstone of that point, right? So, neat. The game was in pre-production before Blunt's arrival, and his first impressions were good. Quote, when I had the opportunity to meet the team, play the game, I was blown away at what the team had been able to create. So at the very least, we know that this early version of the game was strong enough to entice Blunt from his previous position at Splash Damage. So again, this is 2001. April. Sorry, 2021, my bad. And as far as Adrian Blunt goes, he still is the chief operating officer at the London branch of CCP. So as far as I can see, it's full steam ahead from that point. Which brings us back to the original article. So what have we learned today? What we've learned is, A, this depiction of how Dust died wasn't quite accurate. There's an entire project, for 2 to 4 years called Project Legion that is oddly enough left out on these things. likely because they never actually showed it at like a presser in the same way that they did with Nova. But because they showed Nova but didn't release it, that was considered to be a failed shooter. So Dust 514's failure is questionable. Calling a game that has never released a failure is really questionable, especially when there's a second shooter project that was never released that we don't talk about. That's why at the very beginning of this, I said, really, you could say that they've had one shooter that no longer exists anymore. You can call it failed if you really, really want to, and the fact that it doesn't exist anymore. But if you're going to say that they have two, you have to say that they've had three. That's just, I mean, like, otherwise you're leaving out part of the story. But either way, the point is that it really hasn't been a second failed shooter. It merely is a ongoing project that has transformed several times over time. Is that good? No. Was, as I said, Cyberpunk 2077 took like 8 to 10 years, I think, to come out because of the fact that they restarted it over and over again. And it still came out rushed because they restarted it less than 2 years before they released it. This is something that happens as a game development studio is attempting to find the fun within the game. So I personally am excited for the effort. No, you cannot play. Well, I mean, there's no server to connect to. I'm excited for the project, and I'm excited for the prospect of having a boots on the ground perspective, shooter or not, set in the EVE Online universe. But obviously, we're going to have to wait a little longer before we get to see it, which is very, very disappointing. But I just wanted to clear some stuff up because, like I said, this stuff has been something that I've been tracking very, very closely. It's been near and dear to my heart for over 10 years. And I want us to have the correct story as we talk about this going forward, because hopefully we're going to get more information about this shooter soon, especially when it comes to like what the lore has been saying and all that kind of stuff. The universe itself has been focused on these clone soldiers literally since they've been gone. And in particular, the story has really focused in on these different old Dust factions, these Dust Corps, and what they've been up to and including the current story, where all four of the pirate groups that they refer to in the current Smuggler arc are all former Dust 514 groups. In the same way that the Crimson Harvest, the Order of the Silver Hand, from the MR was a Dust 514 group. They've been really attempting to continue to keep the war clones alive. And it does seem to continue to be very important for them to be able to build the immersion. And if anything, I think that they did learn that there is an appetite for the shooter. And more importantly, it's a great way to bring people into the universe. It did succeed in its objective to bring people in, even based on its limited success. Therefore, one might assume that a high amount of success, or even a mediocre amount of success, will bring in a whole bunch of people. And so as far as side projects go, and first of all, as far as having side projects go, every game studio is going to have different projects, and a successful project is going to fund other projects. Like, that's just how it works, right? How do you think new games get built? So, and as a company, having all of their eggs in one basket is actually really bad. It's really bad for them, and it's really bad for us. So ultimately, they know, or at least they feel like they have to expand outside of just the one offering, which, rather than being disparaging about the fact that like they keep trying to do this stuff, the point of the matter is that like they feel needed to, they feel they need to, and so it's about getting it right. So I'm interested in trying to help make it right, because Valkyrie suffered from not having a PvE and not being properly communicated to people when it was no longer VR. Dust failed Dust didn't meet its potential because it was on the PS3 and all of the problems that fell into trying to keep it alive afterwards. And they've had significant problems because of all of this communication. All of this history that we've been talking about is their dirty laundry aired out for the world to see. So that way, in the end, somebody can make a half-assed, not like half-truth version of the story that talks about how many failures they've had, right? Like, so I don't know. It both frustrated me and inspired me to really kind of set the record straight. And I hope that this has been at least somewhat informative to you guys. But either way, if you are this far and you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with your friends. It really does help. If you want to support the channel, you can always, just keep watching my videos or come watch my live stream most weekdays at, I think it's like, what, 2200 to 2400? I don't know, 000? Somewhere in there. Shit. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, and we talk about EVE Online, and we discuss the lore. We play different aspects of the game and have a good time. Otherwise, you can always support me on Patreon and join the wonderful list of people that I thank, both in the doobly-doo and me reading out their names. So on that note, thank you to BlackRoseNoble, Serenalin, Syliana Vel'ash, Nephilim, Grendel, MidnightSpaceMonkey, Talking in Stations, and Ebo1337 and Elange, my Immortal tier patrons. Thanks for that. And if you want to join that, you can get on the written list for $1 a month and on the read out loud list for $5 a month. And get our eternal gratitude for letting me do this for all of you. But without further ado, I have been Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden. Thank you all for watching. And until next time, I'll see you in space.